Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paddy Markey. I'm the marketing manager for Coloplast Wound and Skin Care. I wanted to welcome you to the fourth of our and final webinar on value-based care. For those of you who are new to the format, all of the previous sessions are available on Coloplast Professional. We'll put a link up on the chat to direct you to that if you haven't already seen Christine's previous presentations. So Christine, welcome back. And
Thank you,
it has, a lot has changed in the 4 weeks since we first started. So much has happened in the world since then, but today is your day. You were saying you're going to summarize and sort of conclude with areas that you've touched on before, because we've talked about a lot of things in the last 4 weeks. The quadruple aim, motivational interviewing, the new NHS infrastructure around ICS, which has come into place on the 1st of July, patient activation measures, and lots more. So like before, I will come off screen now, and then I will come back at the end of your presentation to capture any questions that the audience have, and we can discuss the presentation.
Cheers, Paddy. Thanks a lot. So I've titled this Value-Based Care, This Is Your Time to Shine, because I think now is the point where you've got to start to bring all this together and start to think about what it really means for you. Next slide, please. And I just want to essentially, next slide. Thank you. I just wanted to quickly remind people why we were doing this. It's about helping you to begin to put the pieces together and understand what value-based care means for you in your day job. Not what it means to somebody in the ICS, but what it actually means for you personally. So in this session today, I am going to be referring back to things that we've done before. I'm also going to put some more definitions of things out there for you to be able to use as a resource. And I'm going to go back to some of the challenges from last week and some interesting things I think that we need to think about. So there might be aspects of this that you might feel are a little bit in the hard box, but if I don't put that on the table now, you'll never ask yourselves the questions. So let's start off with the journey, and we're going to actually first of all look at some thoughts around value-based care. All right, so next slide, please. So as we've said before, the system in which we all work now, the day job now, encourages activity, not outcome. Okay, it's based on numbers of people through the door. And the whole concept of value-based care is shifting that to being much more patient-centric. And it's about looking at the things that matter to the patient, okay, and looking at it over the full cycle of care. Now, I'm going to come back to this later on, because the challenge I have for you is if you've been seeing a patient for maybe 12 months, 2 years, why? Because actually the cost of that is phenomenal. Why have we not found a solution? And the whole point of this is to get the outcomes right, understand the population that we're dealing with, and get the interventions appropriate for those individualized patients. So value is created at the local level of the patient, but it's about understanding the totality of the population that will help you move forward. So at the bottom there, I've taken Porter's definition of value, and it's the set of outcomes that matter for the condition and the patient. For the condition, I put that down because that's about what you're trying to aim towards. Remember, we talked about the goal of the clinician and the goal of the patient. So this is about the goal of the condition and the goal of the patient. So your goal, your healing rate, the patient's goal, whatever you've identified with the patient, through the way you're working with them, what they want to achieve. And the value is that set of outcomes over the total cost of delivering these outcomes over the full care of cycle that you're putting into place. So my challenge to you would be, just looking at this, how long does your care cycle last? How long are you setting as a care cycle? So you started for 10 when you first see a patient. Next slide, please. So kind of getting a bit of a shift in thinking to help us move, and some radical thoughts here. So what we've got to move is from what's in the red box to what's in the green box. Okay, so we've got this concept of we need to drive down and minimize costs of healthcare spending. We have to drive down and minimize costs of spending on the care as it stands now, what we do now. So going back to the example I said before, if we've been seeing the patient for 2 years, how much is it costing? And we've got to move away from that and think about how we get that, shrink that down and redirect money into investing in health, which means investing in prevention. And I feel like this is where I do my broken record thing again: prevention, early intervention, and promoting optimum health. That's in every level of the patients that we're dealing with, whether they're healthy or whether they've got a long-term condition. We've got to fill those gaps in data. Prior to us starting today, Paddy and I were talking about the sequin, and the start point is understand the data. Well, if you haven't got the data, how do you understand it? So there's something about what is the data you need to start understanding. And this takes us back to population health management to enable you to actually get what you need. So we've got to improve and modernize and standardize the data that we're trying to get to. We've got, in the world of health, for as long as I can remember, we had testing, the old famous phrase, in inverted commas, let's do a pilot. So we do a pilot and the pilot never moves on from pilot status. And we've got proven things that we've got out there, but we scale them slowly or we don't scale them at all. We've got to get into more of a risk environment. And actually, if something works, then we've got to look at how we apply it. That doesn't matter whether it's just wholly within your service, actually within the setting of a PCN, which is huge opportunity to test things out, or at bigger place settings. But you've got to find ways of, if it works, how do you get the spread and how do you do it consistently and equitably so you don't get parts of the population left out. This next one relates particularly to the actually industry. R&D in the health industry, it's very narrow in its scope. It's around clinical interventions, pharmaceuticals, etc. But now we're in a different place. We've got to innovate quickly, and we've got to think about that intersection between technology, digital, and interventions. How do we do some of that? And that's not just about the patient clinician interface. That's also about admin and the clinician use of things that will speed up how they do things, and the utilization of digital to support that. And the last but by no means least, we live in a world where we recognize that modifiable behaviors actually contribute to the challenges around health. So how can we up our game on that side of things so we improve health behavior and get to the point where individuals actually steward their own health? And we've got to do this in anger. We've got to do it in anger because it's so critical to enabling us to move forward. So here's the first of my thought processes now. Next slide, please. Your goal is for your patients to be the healthiest version of themselves, even with a chronic condition. That is value-based care. Your patients to be the healthiest version of themselves. How do you get them to that place? And I've put those 3 things at the top there just to remind you, 42% possible reduction in absenteeism through wellness programs. I've put there, it's never too late to change your life. It's not. It's never too late to make a change. And things get tough often before they get easier. So we need to constantly think about how do we do this and how do we adopt that and how do we make that work. I'm not saying that's easy, but guys, by the way, I'm not saying that. But that's the essence of value-based care. Next slide, please. This slide's going to come up a couple of times in this presentation now. So what I've tried to do here is to bring together the things you need to understand, begin to think about and understand. I'll go to the bit about the triangle a bit later. I'm going to leave that one out for now. So the first thing you've got to do is understand your caseload and your population. More difficult if you're in the acute setting, I understand that. But certainly in the community setting, you've got to understand that caseload and population. But you've also got to understand, if you're in the acute setting, how are you interfacing with the people in the community that are managing this caseload to help you move that through. Stratify the caseload, I'll come back to. Remember, everyone is an individual, so you can't treat them all the same. It's not about putting the same bandage on the same leg every day, you know, in the community. You've got to say, what is the most appropriate for this individual? And this is where I run into a bit of a danger zone to a degree, because I then go back to, as part of value-based care, if I use a product on that patient that costs more, but they heal quicker, then that is value-based care, because I'm not extending the time to heal. I'm actually reducing it. And we've got to get our heads more and more around this kind of stuff and challenge the system on that. So that takes me to the next one. It's not all about dressings. A dressing is a tool. It's part of your toolkit. These are part of your toolkit as well. Your hands every day. So you're not just treating a leg, you're treating a person. And actually, it's about how you make that work for you and work for that individual. And where I started before, if it's going on and on, when do you stop and say something's not right and that a different solution is needed? How many people out there in the community, and this is more of a challenge for community nursing than it maybe is for TVNs, but I'll come back to that relationship in a minute or two. But, you know, it's no use. It's so demotivating going in day after day and just sticking a bandage on and knowing nothing's happening. What's the point? And there's a massive cost to that as well, in terms of the nurse time and in terms of the actual items that are being used to dress the leg. Motivational interviewing, we've talked about this. Shared ownership of the journey. I'm going to give you a little bit on that in this session, and also give you a link to look more closely at it for yourselves, because there's loads of stuff out there that can help you get your head around it. And there's some courses that you can get on that don't cost any money. They're online courses, and it will just help you start the journey, if you like. And of course, I'm going to mention this, aren't I? Patient activation. Understanding a person's skills, confidence, and knowledge to manage their own health. If you don't understand that, how can you know if they can do it? It's impossible. And you can't just make assumptions. Next slide, please. So all of that I've just talked about there plays back into where we started around the triple and quadruple aim. We've got to improve the population health and well-being. Some of the things on there, we talked about that, but we've got to understand our population. We've got to enhance the experience of care. That's the bit of the combination of the joint ownership of the objective between the clinician and the patient. If we do that, we will increase the well-being and engagement of the workforce. There's nothing worse than going to work and wondering what you've achieved in a day, apart from see a load of people and not sure what you've moved them onto. I can't imagine how hard it is for nurses who are rote behaving in terms of going out and just ticking the boxes that they've seen the 15 people that they should have seen today. We've got to move away from that to make people feel of a value themselves. If we do a lot of that, we will start to reduce the cost per head of healthcare. We will, and it will improve productivity. And as we change how we work, we will contribute to the sustainability agenda, because we won't be using as many bandages, we won't be needing as much packaging, and all that will start to contribute to the net zero piece with that as well. And of course, as a direct result of getting more involved in population health, that pushes us into dealing with variations in care that exist across the whole of this country in terms of how wounds are treated, for sure. Next slide, please. So I've come back to this again, and I'm just going to remind us about that stratification of the caseload. Remember, we talked about it last week. I did it in a very simple way, but when you know your caseload, you've then got to look at where do they sit in your triangle, in your personal triangle. Next slide, please. So to remind ourselves of the triangle, very simplistic, you can do your own. But, you know, this was what I put together just to get you to think about it. So at the whole population set, what are we trying to do? We're trying to understand people who are at risk of potentially swollen legs, wet legs, leg ulcers, and we need to encourage the use of British Standard hosiery. At the next level, where we do have people with skin tears, pretibial lacerations, those early simple, in inverted commas, wounds, we need to actually act quickly, not wait the 6 weeks. Why wait 6 weeks when you know there's a solution? There's an early intervention that in the practice we can get on and deliver, which is a timely response around the use of a dressing plus a hosiery. So in my world, I might be thinking of the use of biotain plus British Standard hosiery. Get that on. That pretibial laceration will start to heal if you get it early enough, and it will never need to be referred on 6 weeks later. So you're stemming the flow. You're actually stopping that flow of people that start to move into that ongoing care needs with the TVN and the community. And we've talked at length about what needs to happen here. And let's understand that in the reducing the time to healing, let's not forget the importance of compression. Compression has such an important place. And I understand how hard it's been. And people go, I can't compress. I'm not allowed to do that. Well, you know, if you don't try, you'll never know whether it works or not, will you? So, you know, the new work that's coming out from the National Wound Care Strategy gives you permission. If you look at the lower limb piece that's come out from National Wound Care Strategy, you have the permission to compress, and you just need to take a deep breath and do it. And do it understanding that you've got your shared outcomes, you've got your patient activation, you're clear on what's happening, and you've got a goal that you're both aiming towards. And then at your top of your triangle, you've got your highest needs. These are the people that are going to always sit in that area. Some of them will drop down into ongoing care, but they may yo-yo between the two. But this is where you've got the significant impact of some of the social determinants, and you need to understand that. What are the things that are also contributing to the complexity of that patient's condition and actually preventing? So it's not always medical, sometimes it's the other thing. Remember what we said about the social determinants, and we're going to come back to that in a moment or two. I don't know whether I've slipped that in this slide deck, but maybe not. You've got it to remember. But 20% of a health outcome is only based on the clinical side of things. If you don't get the other thing, you minimize the impact you can create. So it's important to have that holistic thinking around what it is you're trying to do with this patient. Next slide, please. So now I've thrown in this slide on the numbers again, because we went through that quite quickly last week, and I just want to do it one more time. So as you realize the potential, and you can use this and put your own numbers in, can't you? So I've just taken cursory numbers to throw them into this to get us off the starting blocks. So here we're looking at our average population here of the ICS at 2 million, place level at 500,000, and a PCN of 50,000. If we move across and we take the National Wound Care Strategy piece, which said 1.5% of the population will have lower limb wounds, you can see the numbers that delivers in each of the areas. So 30,000 at ICS level, 7,500 at place level, and 750 at PCN level. If we then move to assume that 60% of those from the guesswork will have non-healing wounds, that gives us 80,000 at the ICS level, 4,500 at the place level, and a small number, which I haven't put, I think it's 450 at the PCN level. If you then put a price on that, because at the moment we don't know who all these people are, all I can do is put a price on it, and I've used an average of 3,700 a patient, which I believe is low now. Okay, if we think about it logically, you are spending, or the system is spending, £66.6 million on non-healing lower limb wounds. At place level, it's 16.7 million, and at PCN level of 50,000, it's 1.7 million. So my question to you is, how can you begin to have an impact on that? How can you begin to get an understanding of the potential in your local area, so as you can start to think about that value-based care model and how do you make a difference? So if it's only at PCN level, if you shaved 300,000 off that 1.7 million, you're a hero. That's your time to shine. You're a hero. You're making a difference, but you can't do it in isolation. And that's something I've been trying to say to you all the way along the line. Next slide, please. So going back again to one of the other slides we looked at, this is not about that old phrase of moving the deck chairs on the Titanic, all right? Because what happens, it still sinks, okay? You have to think about the model. You have to think, what is the model that's going to actually move us forward to make this work? And put your focus on lower limb if you want, or choose something else to do, but put it where you can make a success. Don't just be random about how you're going to move forward with this. Next slide, please. Because nothing changes in terms of what I said earlier, and I'll stick by this. The system was never broken. It was built this way. This is how we built the NHS, because at the time it was built, it was relevant to do it this way. But things have progressed. We've got issues all over the place in terms of demographics, capacity, staffing, and of course, aging people. We've got all of those things. But you see, I want to take you to the hypothesis. The traditional model of healthcare, and I keep saying this word healthcare, weird, isn't it? It involves working with sick people. It doesn't involve keeping people healthy. It involves working with sick people, using medication, telling patients instructions, do this, do that, whatever, and having in the main only a snapshot of their health status, a snapshot in time, because we don't see them in the context of their own environment. And therefore, that's what we've got to change. So we move away again from that activity-based approach to the quality of care we need to deliver, from volume to value. And we embrace the concept of lifestyle as a key part of that to get and start to have a modern understanding of health, not the 1948 version of healthcare as a sickness service. And I think that, again, is really, really important. Next slide, please. And this is a hot potato, and I put this in deliberately. I used this yesterday when I was talking to primary care, general practice. Look at it and think about it. A small team of highly committed people goes further than a large group of self-serving individuals. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is you often, and I may be wrong in individuals particularly that might be on this call, you often work in a very disjointed environment. So the TVN team will work in their world and have things that they use for dressings. The community team work in their world and they can't necessarily connect with the TVNs to make it work. Primary care works differently again, and it's how much can you get out of primary care for your dressing, for your prescription to get you going where you, and none of it fits together. And you've got each bit keeping their own little bit private and saying, well, I need to look after my bit because it's too hard to get involved in the other bit because I've got too much to do myself. And that's what I mean by that. And it's much better that you get a small team of people who think, do you know, this is really exciting. I want to get involved in this. I want to do something. That will take you far further than all these larger groups of people coming together with their own goal in mind, instead of the goal, the totality of the goal. So please really think about what I'm saying on that specific slide, because it takes us back to one of the other slides we've used before. Next slide, please. The answer to climbing steep hills is knowing you need others. This is not a go it alone job. This is not you as an individual being a hero. This is about teams being heroes. And it's about making that connectivity again. It's too fragmented. We've got to start to bring it together to make this work. We're working with a number of companies across the England now. And it's really interesting to try and break down those barriers to get people to talk to each other and realize that no one bit of it can do it on its own. You've got to bring the parts together to make this happen. And that includes PCNs, primary care networks. Remember, primary care networks, and I haven't said a lot about this, but I think it's really important for you out there to remember, a primary care network is made up of practices. Each practice has its own population. But when you put the population together, as I keep telling the primary care networks that I work with, the primary care network's job is dealing with the totality of the population, not the bit that sits in each practice. So anything we do, if it's a small PCN, say, if we've got a population of 30,000, the PCN focuses on the 30,000, not on 13,000 that sits here, 3,000 that sits there, and however many thousand that are left that sit here. It's the totality, and that's an opportunity for wound care. I'm absolutely convinced of it. Next slide, please. So, cutting to the chase now. What's it like where you work? What do you need to understand to make it work more effectively and in a joined up way? What is it you've got to do? Now, here's the questions you've got to be asking. All right. And I just made a few here, and I'm sure you've got more. And I've got a couple of typos on there, and I'm really sorry about that. So how does the TVN team operate right now? How do you operate now? And I would say in many cases, you know, you're operating in the old style. And you need to get your head around how you're going to do this differently. What's the relationship between the TVN and the community team? Normally, it's not great, because the TVN feels like, why can't they just get on and do it? I haven't got the time to deal with this, and I can't take the referral, and I can't advise, So you've got to try and think about, how do you overcome that little barrier? How are the competencies for wound care measured for people to be able to deliver wound care, bandaging, whatever we do? Those in the community that are being sent out to do it, how are you measuring the competencies to be able to do that? And who holds the overarching ownership for wound care? Where does it sit? So who says, I'm going to lead this, I want to take responsibility for this and drive this forward and do it differently? What's the relationship with the acute, with the hospital? And how much knowledge have you got of primary care and the potential that does exist around the PCNs? Do you even know who the clinical directors are in your patch? Pick one PCN and start to learn about one. Do something, but start to think about that. And how much do you know about the potential size of the problem? Go back to those figures I've given you and do the sums, do the math on your own area as best you can to find out how much money we're talking about. Because at the end of the day, if you don't know what you're working with, you can't change it. You can't. It's impossible. You can't have an impact on it. You're just still doing what you do every day in the day job with that individual that's sitting in front of you. And it's a much bigger task, and it's a much bigger opportunity. And finally, I would say to you about this is find like-minded people. They're out there. And begin to map out how it could be better and what needs to happen to get you there. And don't, remember we talked about it, don't bite the elephant. Bite-sized chunks. We know what the elephant in the room is, and this kind of summarizes it. But find the people and begin to map it out. Don't try and find the solution and just run away with it and then think, oh my God, I've made a mistake. It doesn't, but you do need to think about starting with the end in mind. Next slide, please. So I'm going a bit left field here because I promised to do something on motivational interviewing and patient activation. So what I've done here is I've taken the original descriptions of what it is and what the clinician needs to change. All right. So these two things are really important for you as individuals. So there's your description: a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication with a particular attention to the language of change. It's designed to strengthen personal motivation and commitment to a specific goal by exploring the person's own reasons for change with an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. Now, I hear so many nurses, and it happened to me when I was Accelerate, lots of nurses would say to me, I haven't got the time to do this. My answer to you is you haven't got the time not to now. It's really, really important that you do this, because if you do it right at the beginning, it will change things at the end. So the clinician has to engage with the customer, with the client, with the patient, whatever name you wish to use, as an equal partner, and stop giving unsolicited advice, confronting, instructing, directing, warning. If you don't do this, then this is going to happen. We've got to stop all of that. And we've got to employ a different set of techniques to actually help move that patient along. And it does require much greater awareness of yourself and much more discipline to be able to actually do that. Next slide, please. So, something to think about. And I was dabbling around with this the other day, and I still think I've used the wrong language here. Is there a new type of work emerging generally that we call lifestyle medicine? I don't like the use of the word medicine. I think I've got that wrong. And can it be described as the evidence-based practice of helping individuals and families adopt and sustain healthy behaviours that affect health and quality of life? And some of this motivational interview will elicit some of this. And of course, for me, the real start of this is social prescribing. And if you ask an average PCN, what do they mean by social prescribing? A lot of them are telling you they haven't got a diddly squat idea. So, because I'm not sure that social prescribing is the right terminology. I'm much happier with health coaching and the concepts of personalization. So there's something happening out there that's going to change things, and we've got to use all the skills that we've got, that little bit of stuff around the motivational interviewing and what we learn about somebody and the social determinants, and then start to think about how do we start to affect those health behaviors, because that's what's going to make the difference at the end of the day. Next slide, please. So what I've put here is I did some work on this week. So motivational interviewing, I found this particular thing, which is a really nice little article. It's a PDF that you can download from this particular doctor, and it was done in February. So it's easy, and it will link you to look for other things. Okay, so it's about using motivational interviewing strategies, and don't try and do it all at once. Just try and test things out so as you can see what you're doing. And then on the patient activation measures, I've given you the detail of what it's a measure of a person's skill, confidence and knowledge to manage their own health, and the scores are 1 to 4, with 1 being low. And I picked this up as well when I was working this week on this. Those with low activation levels have a greater chance of hospitalization and use of A&E for things that, if they were, could be managed better. It could be managed properly. And I've given you there the website for Insignia Health. But this is about getting you off and starting you on the journey to start you to look for these things when, and I feel terrible saying this because I know you're all very, very busy people, but you've got to start getting your head around this a little bit to help you move forward. Okay, next slide, please. I'm nearly at the end now. A couple of things, that's all. So I go back now to reminding you of this very, very, very important slide, because if you can't change your mindset, this is going to forever stay in the hard box for you. If you are sitting with a fixed mindset, for me, saying what I'm saying to you today is probably really rubbing you up the wrong way and getting on your nerves, to be honest. Because to actually embrace this, you need to be sitting in the green head, the growth mindset, and thinking about how you do this, how you really make the difference, how you start to make a difference in you as an individual, and how you start to find like-minded people, and how you start to learn about what's working in your area, and how you become a value-based care champion in wound care. Because that's what we're talking about here. You become a champion locally, and you start to bring people with you, and it takes time. There's no quick solution to this, for sure. That is not going to happen. And you've got to actually do it in bite-sized chunks. But if you've got a vision of what the end looks like, you know what you're heading towards, in the same way as having that vision of that end point with your patient. That's your start point. When you see the patient, however many patients you're seeing today or tomorrow, think about that individual sitting in front of you. Think about, is it the first time you've seen them? Is it the 6th? Is it the 26th? And with each one of them, set a different goal. Set a different goal for where the end point is. That's the start of your journey, because you're starting to do something differently. And the last slide, please. And the last slide is that one I showed in the middle. Your goal with value-based care is for your patients to be the healthiest version of themselves. That's what you're trying to do, so that if they become that person and they understand how to manage their personal triggers. If something goes wrong, they know what to do. They know at the point they need to contact somebody. Then you are making a massive difference to the way the care of wounds moves forward in this country. I'm going to stop there. And I'd like to say, before I finish, thank you to those of you who stayed the course with us. I hope you found it valuable. I certainly have really enjoyed doing it. And I look forward to feedback, Paddy, as well, if we can get some feedback for those who've been on the whole course, or if people want further information, then I'm happy to do that through yourselves in Coloplast. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Christine. I've really enjoyed the last 4 weeks. It's been very educational and learned an awful lot. A lot of new terminology and things I have to go away and research further. But one thing that struck me, what you mentioned there in your list, was who owns wound care? And a colleague of mine had said a few months back that actually who cares about wound care? Probably very similar questions. What's your view on, well, I have two questions. One is within the new organization and structures around the ICS, who is responsible for wound care? Or is the problem and the challenge is that no one is responsible currently?
The problem is no one is responsible currently. It's not on anybody's priority list right now. There's a big push to get it on the priority list. I met with somebody from NHS England last week that I hadn't been in touch with for ages and ages, and we set each other a challenge. I set her a challenge to find an ICS that was interested in wound care, and I said, I'll take the challenge to tell them what the size of the prize is if they get involved in it. So there's nobody that's got it on their radar as such. And that's why it's really important for people to understand the environment in their working, where they're working. It's very rare that it's actually detailed in a contract at the minute, unless there is a separate division that's actually got a contractual arrangement somewhere. So they're being measured against it. And that's part of the problem. It's not really on a PCN's priority list at the moment, but I've been trying hard to get it on there to say to people, this is an easy win. You can actually show what can happen when you do something different. There's great results to be made here, and you'll be heroes as well. So that's the problem. You've got to really ferret around a bit out there and find out if there is anything you can hang your hat on, and if there isn't, how are you going to do it? That's the next challenge. How are you going to do it if you really want to?
Yeah, but as you say, that little sort of analysis of if 60% of wounds are unhealed, it's quite straightforward to show what impact that's having locally.
So absolutely 100%. It's not, that's what I keep saying to people when I talk to them. It's not rocket science, but when you live in it day in, day out, like a lots of our audience are, it's really hard to get your head above the parapet and think differently. It's really hard. It's easy for me because I look at it and I think, why can't we do this? I don't understand what's holding us back. And basically it's about saying, look, I need to stop and take stock. I've got 60%, on average, I'll have 60% of wounds that aren't healing. If I just focus on that, how are we going to do it different? How do I talk to the team about what our patient cohort looks like? It's back to understanding that patient cohort again, the caseload.
I think there's a few questions that have come up in the chat, which I guess, when you mention stop and take stock, that's, how do people manage that? And what advice would you give? Because both Joanne and I think Bridget both have asked, they're in this situation, I think, or understand that, you've got an ever increasing workload with ever deplete and diminishing resources. So how do they stop and take stock when there's huge issues? Joanne has just put in the chat with a tissue viability team of between 6 and 8 people for a population of just under 800,000. What advice would you give them as the first action they should take?
Right. So there's a couple of things in that question, Paddy. There's a couple of things in that question. So first of all, it's clear that with 6 to 8 tissue viability nurses, you've got to get a different infrastructure to support you on that. And this is where I move into the world of saying, what about lower limb coordinators? Anybody who knows me will know I've got a big thing about lower limb coordinators because it's a development opportunity for people to actually create lower limb coordinators that focus specifically on that and relate into a TBN team so that they can work in the community. But also, I think it's more than that. I think you've got to break it down, take that 800,000 population and break it down into the PCNs and look at how you start to liaise with those. That would be the first thing I'd do. I'd understand those, understand which PCNs those patients sit in, and try to maybe allocate people to PCNs. There's different ways. I'd have to have a look at it in greater detail to be able to help somebody to understand how to do that. I don't know enough about it, so I'm blagging a bit here, Paddy. But at the end of the day, you can't always recruit TVNs. You have to find a way of getting competent people to be able to support what needs to be done. You've got to understand the population, and you've got to understand the opportunity. The question is, how do you find the time? Well, I would put it to most people that if you spent 1 hour a week doing some of this work, it would absolutely make a difference. 1 hour a week to start to look at this side of things and start to pull the detail together and say, keep a little book somewhere that's your intelligence gathering book. So you start to put it all in and then begin to fit it together. That's all I can say at this point without having more detail.
Okay, thank you. I've another question, which you mentioned at the very beginning of the talk around pilots, and it sort of struck a chord with me, is that we seem to have, it was one of the things Chris Sterling from the MedTech Directorate coined a phrase last year about we're suffering from pilotitis, which I thought was a great word, because what advice do you give, and what's the reasons for how we get stuck in these pilots that keep going on forever? And what's the main, I guess, obstacle in moving a pilot into an embedded action?
So one of the biggest problems with a pilot is we expect it to deliver too much. So what we do is we get pilot creep. We start off with an idea, then somebody goes, oh, we'll add that in. Oh, and while we're doing that, we might as well do that. And then suddenly you can't measure anything because it becomes too big. And we have to understand at the outset, why are we doing this? What is the clear objective that we're trying to set? What's the problem we're trying to solve by doing what we're going to do? Define the problem you're trying to solve and construct it to solve the problem, and collect the data to underpin the solution. Okay, the problem I'm trying to solve is this, and do each of them in small chunks and then bring it together. Don't try and do it all in one big thing, because it won't work, because it becomes a blooming great project that never gets off the ground because you can't measure it. People are interested in what you find out. You know, small steps, big change. Small steps, big change. That's the mantra, okay? And define the problem. Understand the problem you're trying to solve, always. Hopefully that'll help a little bit, but stop using the word pilot. Whenever I'm talking to anybody now, I won't use it. I just absolutely ban on my vocabulary. I will not do a pilot. It's just pointless because it'll never get off the ground.
And what terminology are you using instead, Christine?
I will just use a project terminology. This is the start of a journey. I'm starting a journey with you guys now, and the first stage of the journey is we need to understand this particular problem and how we find a solution for it. Start a journey. You know, that's what you're trying to do. That's what every damn pilot's trying to do, is start a journey, but it never leaves the car park. Gets stuck in a, you know, it gets blocked in.
Yeah.
So start the journey, and a small problem that you want to solve. People know this, called quality improvement.
Yes. Quality
improvement, but also in wound care, it's cost improvement. Because these are all cost improvement, quality improvement initiatives. You just need to get the wording right to say, you guys out there need to, I'm not talking to the delegates now. You guys out there need to understand that there is a great opportunity here, but we need to just test the hypothesis. That's another good phrase to use. Let's test the hypothesis.
Yeah, that will appeal to many people. Christine, there's a question that came up from Bridget, who's in the Isle of Wight, and it's interesting because it reflects all of the data that we've seen, and we've gone back to the burden of wound study and the work done by Guest and his colleagues. You know, she's saying there's high influx of diabetes with high risk, and that sort of maybe points to where social prescribing or health coaching could help Is there any examples you have of where that's
So,
already in place?
so there is a huge opportunity. I haven't got any examples because at the moment I think I could probably find some to actually feed back to you, Paddy, to pass on, which I'm happy to do. But with the organisations I personally am working with at the moment, the importance is to understand the role of. I've just had the challenge sent to me yesterday from a PCN. Tell me what we should be doing with our social prescribers. What are they there to do? Well, if you don't know what they're there to do, for God's sake, how do you know how to use them? So get them focused. If people don't know, if the PCN doesn't know what to do with it, get them focused on wound care. Get an initiative going around that and say, let's identify people who, whether it's diabetes linked as well, but with diabetes, absolutely it's health coaching. 100% health coaching, especially with type 2. Especially with type 2. Because that's what matters, is getting them coached correctly and understanding the context in which that individual is living. So if you've got somebody who's living in a chaotic household where the family always eating chips and going out for a pint, then the chance of their diabetes being managed kind of diminishes quite rapidly, you know. So we've got to get to that point. And I read something today. Somebody had written something on LinkedIn, and don't ask me why I was looking at this today, but it just happened to come up about fat shaming. You know, we've got to stop talking about people being fat. We have to stop doing that. And we've got to say, you know, what do you understand that you need to do to help you live your best life? That's what I'm here to do as a clinician. I'm here to help you live your best life. I can't live it for you, but I can help you achieve it. So you're back into that motivational interviewing, because a lot of people don't have the drive to do it themselves. They need you to hold a hand a bit.
Yeah.
So, and social prescribing is well placed to help that. Well placed.
Great. Chrissy, I've got one further question, and I know there's a few comments popping up in the chat about diet and people agreeing with what you're saying. Just within I feel the sense we're at a crossroads, and I've been working in wound care and medical devices for crikey 25 years or so, but I do feel that the time now is we're ready for change, and the structures are being put in place to help facilitate that. In terms of the ICS structures, are there any particular timelines? I know it sort of officially came into being from the 1st of July, but what's the next sort of timeline or date?
Do you know what I think the real big pressure points are at the moment? I think the real big pressure points for ICS are around population health, so that they can demonstrate they understand their population and they've stratified and understand the needs around particular areas. I think there's a huge pressure around the functionality of primary care networks. Can they do what they're meant to do? Because for those of you who aren't aware, there was a lady called Claire Fuller, who's the chief executive of Surrey Heartlands and also a GP. And she was asked to do a stock take on primary care. And she's done the stock take, and she's saying, essentially, primary care networks that are looking like they're beginning to mature a little bit should shift from being a primary care network to being an integrated neighbourhood team. Because a primary care network is not just about GPs, it's about all those people. So there's a big job to be done there. And I think the other big piece of the agenda, which I know is where the ICSs are having their feet held to the fire a little bit, is the digital agenda. It absolutely is. And I think even if you look at the wound care strategy, they're constantly looking at how systems collect data so that they can prove what they're trying to do. And if somebody needs advice on what data they should be collecting and even setting up their trackers, then, you know, if somebody comes to you and asks, then I'm quite happy to give some advice on that, because your data, big data matters. Yeah. It matters. Eventually you can get it into a system, but start collecting it first.
Yes, but as you say, you have to define the problem first, but there's a chicken and egg situation there, isn't it? If you don't have the data, how do you define the problem?
Well, use the financial bit to define it. Yeah. That's why I put the financial thing up. I've no data, but I know what it's costing.
Yes, exactly. Well, listen, Christine, it's been fantastic to listen to you and talk to you over the last 4 weeks. I don't think there are any further questions coming up in the chat. So I'll say again that, you know, if all of these sessions have been recorded, and they sit in on Coloplast Professional, and we will be communicating and giving everybody a link to that and the follow up those who have registered. So it sort of leaves me to say thank you once again. It's been fantastic 4 weeks. I can't believe how quickly it has flown by. But look forward to seeing you again, and have a great day.
Thanks, Paddy, and good luck to everybody.